So the state of Texas, basically the entire state of Texas, just went through a historic winter weather event. And due to the absolute mountain of bad advice and hearsay and misleading and just patently false information I'm seeing on social, it seems like the perfect time to record a video describing exactly what you should expect from winter weather and water coverage from your insurance program. In this quick video, we're going to cover a few questions that I'm sure a lot of our people, our friends and clients and partners have with regards to coverage for winter and water events. Some of those questions are, what is covered standard on just about every well-written policy? What is available by endorsement? What can you add to a policy if you and your agent or broker are having a good conversation? And what is not covered? What is not available really on any policy? And probably most importantly for you guys out there that are making decisions, if you cut corners, if you choose to go with the lower quality, lower cost option, what are you likely giving up? We're going to go into that in great detail as quickly as possible right after this bumper. So we've got a lot to cover. I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. Anytime there is a big, widespread situation where a lot of people are impacted, there's always going to be misinformation. So I'm just going to be super direct and go right down the bullet point list and address these questions here. So when it comes to a winter event, when it comes to frozen pipes, frozen homes, power outages, slippery road conditions, there's several main categories that we want to be mindful of. I'm not really going to be talking about vehicle situations because those are pretty straightforward. If you're involved in a motor vehicle accident with more than one party, whoever did the hitting, whoever failed to yield is probably going to be at fault. If it's just a slip and slide sort of situation, Texas is a mutual fault or no fault state, so both parties would probably be responsible for their own thing. If it's a one car incident where you're not impacting another vehicle, you're just losing control of your vehicle and either impacting a stationary object, or your vehicle is damaged by itself. It rolls, flips, goes upside down, in some way is physically damaged. All of those things are pretty straightforward. We're mostly going to focus on property, specifically your home or your investment property, because that is what most of the chatter that we've seen this week and in most of these weather events, that's really what it is the main subject of conversation. So the very first thing we're going to address is the question of what is covered on my policy, just in a very general sense. I'm going to assume that your agent did a good job. They wrote your policy with a quality company that has good standard coverages. If you got cut rate insurance, we're going to talk about that here in just a little bit, of what you can expect to be missing from your policy if you consciously went with the cheap option. We'll talk about that here in a second. But if you have a standard, normal, good policy that has the things we assume that every good policy has, the interior water pipes, if there's a burst pipe, if there is damage to sheetrock, drywall, personal property inside of your home, everything that's from that burst pipe situation, everything that's damaged, I should say, is almost certainly going to be covered by every quality standard policy. Interior burst pipe, anything that's damaged from water getting somewhere it doesn't belong. One caveat I want to point out is that the burst pipe itself is typically not included in the standard coverage. You can purchase additional coverage for endorsements for equipment breakdown and other things. Every carrier has a little bit different language that they call it, but the plumbing implementation is not typically covered, but the damage caused by the failure of that plumbing implement is covered in most cases. All right, next up is pools and hot tubs and outdoor equipment. The news on this one is not as good, unfortunately, when it comes to freezing and thawing. For other causes of loss, for hail, wind, theft, vandalism, burst water pipe just from, sudden and accidental discharge, most of the time you're going to have coverage for pools and hot tubs. But in this case, a lot of carriers include exclusionary language because of freezing and thawing. They are putting the burden on the policyholder to properly secure those items, which obviously any reasonable person knows when it's literally 0 degrees outside is pretty hard to do. But unfortunately, most carriers, even the good ones, don't have the best coverage for pools and hot tubs and outdoor equipment. Next is what is commonly referred to as slow leaks. In the insurance world, we call it seepage and leakage. It's where there's not a burst water pipe. There's just a little drip somewhere that it doesn't belong. This coverage is not included standard on really any homeowners or dwelling policy, but it is available by endorsement on just about every quality policy. So ask your agent or broker if your policy has slow leak protection, aka seepage and leakage protection. Typically, it will be a percentage of the building coverage on the policy, or on the really good ones like Travelers and Safeco and State Auto and some other ones that we represent. You have really good options for slow leak protection on your homeowners and on your dwelling policy. All right, up next is spoiled food. This is really a thing for people that have a second fridge or a freezer in your garage, because a lot of those appliances have a temperature regulator that causes them to shut off when they sense that the outdoor temperature is low enough that they don't need to run at that moment. And a lot of times they don't turn back on the way that they should, and food can spoil in there. There's a lot of really bad information. I saw a post going around, it was semi-viral, that USAA was offering $500 per policy where you didn't have any deductible and didn't have any sort of claim penalty attachment to the spoiled food, and that is categorically not true. You do have to file a claim in order to receive spoiled food. Now, unless someone can show me hard evidence that USAA was paying people $500 without having any deductible and not having any chargeable loss on their policy, that I can't imagine that's even close to accurate. So spoiled food is covered. It's covered under personal property, and it's covered under the municipal loss of power language. If you have the proper endorsement on your policy, it's not going to be covered standard, but it's entirely possible to have it covered by endorsement on your policy. But it is subject to a deductible. You're not going to get $500 for free from your insurance carrier. That's not really how it works. Next up is hotel stays and anything that falls under the category of additional living expenses. So you had to go to the grocery store, or you had to eat out 12 times because the power at your house was out. All of these things are going to be under the loss of use coverage on a policy. Some carriers call this additional living expenses. This by itself is not going to be a claim. This coverage is triggered by what's called a covered cause of loss. So if you have a covered cause of loss, if there was some reason why your power went out other than just municipal failure, if you have the endorsement on your policy that allows for municipal disruption of power, there's a lot of different language that the carriers use to describe my power went out because the grid failed. The electric provider just couldn't get power to my house, which we all know from looking at social media is what happened with ERCOT and Encore and other providers here in Texas. They just flat out failed us. They are directly responsible, in my opinion, for billions of dollars in insurance claims. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of very large class action lawsuits, but that's an entirely separate situation. Anything under the loss of use category is not a claim by itself. It has to be part of an existing claim for the building, for covered cause of loss. You can't file a loss of use claim by itself. It has to be packaged with an existing claim for a covered cause of loss. Next up is trees, shrubs, and bushes. I've seen a lot of bad information about this as well. A lot of carriers provide a fixed dollar amount per tree, shrub, and bush. Some carriers it's $250, some carriers it's up to $500 or even $1,000, but it is subject to the policy deductible, and it has to be, again, triggered by a covered cause of loss. So looking at the insuring agreement on your policy, looking at the causes of loss that are covered by your policy. Do you have basic form or special form? These are questions to be asking your insurance agent. Because if you have a covered cause of loss, then it's entirely possible to get coverage for your trees and bushes and shrubs, but there's usually a cap of some kind on the policy. It might be $2,500, it might be $5,000 or $10,000, but it is subject to your policy deductible, and it is, again, subject to being the result of a covered cause of loss. So if you have any questions about that particular coverage item, just ask your agent or broker. Okay, this is a big one. Exterior water coming inside. Snow melt getting somewhere it doesn't belong. The problem with all of those types of situations is snow melt is no different than any other kind of surface water. Most carriers are going to consider snow melt as surface water, and any kind of outside water that comes into your house is going to be considered a flooding event or surface water intrusion, and those kind of situations are not ever covered by homeowners or dwelling insurance. Those are categorically intended to be covered by flood insurance. And a lot of you guys are going to be sitting there fuming going, but I don't have flood insurance. I don't need flood insurance. I'm not in a floodplain. I'm not required by my lender to have flood insurance. I've never had flood insurance. I get it. That's one of those things that is not good. It is not normal in a situation like this. We typically don't have 8 inches of snow on the ground that melts and goes places it wasn't intended to go. But here we are. If you don't have flood insurance, you don't have coverage for surface water getting into your house. If it's inside water that goes somewhere it wasn't supposed to go in your house, that's a totally different situation. But if it's outside water that comes in, probably don't have coverage unless you have flood insurance. All right, so now the real question is, if you cut corners and you went with the cheap option, what are you giving up? There's a few very, very big things that you're giving up if you have what's called basic form cause of loss. A lot of carriers, especially if it's an investment property, if it's tenant occupied, and if it is a renovation or a flip property, a lot of carriers have the option of doing basic form cause of loss, which is going to provide exactly what it sounds like, basic coverage. So you're going to have coverage for things like fire and lightning and wind and hail and aircraft and vehicles and those sorts of 8 major basic perils. What you're not going to have is coverage for frozen and thawing water pipes. You're not going to have coverage for collapse of structure. In a lot of cases, you're not going to have coverage for theft and vandalism and malicious mischief unless you endorse the coverage back on for an additional fee. So collapse of the structure itself, should also mention that. Collapse of structure, like if there's a whole bunch of snow on your roof and the roof caves in, probably not covered if you have basic form cause of loss. So this is a perfect example of one of those times when if you go cheap, you're going to pay for it in the end. So make sure you're getting special form cause of loss, at the very least getting broad form cause of loss. Always get special if it's available. The coverage is much better than basic form, and typically the insurance cost is a reasonable increase from basic form. So if you don't have any idea what you have, talk to your agent or broker. If you're one of our clients, you have a 99-point-something% chance of having special form cause of loss on your policies. That is what we write almost exclusively. So hope that clears up the question on those items above. If you have questions about your policy, we'd be happy to be taking a look at that for you. You can always call our office at 469-678-8001, or you can email us at info@riskwell.com. That's it for today, boys and girls. Please remember, life is risky. Risk well.